mine's not blinking anymore.
Okay. Test, 1, 2, 3. Test.
Sibilance. Sibilance.
There you go.
Wayne's World?
We're good to go.
I got the reference.
Okay.
Yeah. It's a good one.
All righty, with the meeting called to order and our audio is in order, regular business, public forum. Mr. John Davis, do we have any members from the public wishing to speak? Okay, thank you. Consent agenda, we have 2 items on our consent agenda, which is the June 18th, 2019 regular meeting minutes and the executive session minutes from the same date. Do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Okay, do I have a second?
I'll second.
Okay, further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, the consent agenda is approved. Financial reports and updates. Our Finance Director, Gabe Boldra.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the board. You have the June financial report in your packet. Kind of looking as we close out the fiscal year. You'll see, starting off, month of June was good for the district on the revenue side. We saw $502,000 in total revenue. Budgeted was $413,000, so we were over by $88,000, of which about $11,000 of that was property tax revenue. And non-levy revenue was over budget by $77,000, and that was predominantly related to ambulance revenue, as well as a payment from the city on a communications project. On the expense side, total expenses were $1,269,000. You could see from the report up there that if you look across, the majority of our expenses were under budget. We were under budget by $11,000 total for the month of June. Personnel was over by $103,000. That was due to timing on healthcare costs. Moving on to the fiscal year. Actually, I have year to date in there, but it's the fiscal year. Budget to actual. Our total revenue for last fiscal year was $17,587,000. We were over budget by $746,000. There was a slight variance on our tax levy revenue. So after the county finishes closing out, I'll be able to analyze our receivable and find out where specifically that lag in revenue collection was for the year. On the non-levy side, we were $790,000 over what our budget was, and the majority of that was related to wildland deployments. Expenses for the fiscal year were $15,178,000, which was under budget by $914,000. You'll see personnel expenses came in under budget by $104,000, buildings and land by $191,000, vehicles and equipment $278,000, communications and IT of $93,000, and managerial of $246,000. So overall, some of that was again related to some of the stuff we discussed through the budget process of some of the budgeting practices historically, and some of it were projects that are identified throughout the year that didn't get worked on for other priorities came up or various reasons for that. We had a 6% remaining in the budget, so that is reflective of that surplus that I just mentioned, or that under budget performance that we saw. Percentage of expenses, so for the year, 85% of our total expenses were personnel, followed by operations at 10% and managerial at 5%. And then finally, ended the year at just over $9 million in total cash. Again, understanding that a large percentage of that cash on hand is allocated to our capital fund, and then as well as our end leave liability fund that we'll have. And then we had 6.7 compared to 6.7 million last year. So we are up, roughly just over 2.3 million over year in cash again. Though remember, we did want to earmark a large portion of that to our capital projects fund. Yeah, other than that, on the finance side, we're with the close of the fiscal year starts kind of our audit prep time. So we'll be working on that and preparing for that, as well as we've implemented the new purchasing order system. Payroll is still in process, and Heidi and I actually spoke today on getting the new credit card system up and out to staff, so that'll allow them to take pictures of the receipts and code them right then and there at point of sale, instead of having, to turn in receipts and everything after the fact. So unless there's any other questions, that's the finance report for June.
Any questions for Gabe?
No, thank you.
Okay, with that said, do I have a motion to approve the June 2019 finance report?
Yeah, I move to approve the June 2019 financial report.
And do I have a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The June 2019 finance report is approved.
Thank you.
Okay. Next item on the agenda is the staff items, essentially the fire chief's report. Chief Coyle.
Yeah, good afternoon. I'm going to stand on this side of the podium because I think it allows
Thank you.
you all to have a little bit better eye contact with me as I'm talking. So, and I am missing part of a tooth, so I'm going to try to talk clearly and concisely. But if anything I say is not legible, please let me know.
Audible?
Not legible. I'm not going to write. All right. So, first thing I want to talk about was the call, the incident summary year to date, and we have seen a significant increase in calls since in June, especially backcountry calls. You'll see that we go up from backcountry rescues, if you will, from 11 in May to 24 in June. Everything else has pretty much been trending normal, but the overall call totals for the month of June were up significantly over May, and I think the crews in the field can attest to that. It's been a busy month, and I expect as long as we have this hot weather that we're going to experience for the next few days, they're going to continue to be busy with rescues. I don't want to jinx them, but that's probably what's going to happen. If you look at the 90th percentile of the response time analysis, it was down to 8:37 in June, and the average response time was 4 minutes and 31 seconds.
Yes, Chief.
So,
If you could say a few words about that, because that's quite
Yeah.
a change in the right direction, but 4.31 almost seems impossible to accomplish.
so that's the average, and the average hides a lot of variability within it because, there's a couple times one thing about being busier is sometimes you're in the rig when you get the next call, so that can occur. When we look at the turnout times, the turnout time is actually up a little bit, which can also be a sign of being busier because after you run a couple back-to-back hikeouts, you're more likely to be caught in the shower before the next one or whatever, getting cleaned up. So when I get to the slide that shows that breakdown that we created, then I'll discuss that a little bit more,
Okay.
Ms. Cooperman, if that's all right.
Thank you.
So there's that slide I was talking about. A couple different things look like they contributed to the 90th percentile decrease. One, the top, that yellow line is travel time. So from the time that the unit checks en route until they get to the actual incident, was down slightly from 8:54 to 8:37. As you see, the red, which is the turnout time, was up a little bit, 2 minutes and 30 seconds. And the call processing time was down significantly, which is, that's actually where the most gain. Just shows you how important that hidden piece of the puzzle is, because there's only certain things we control, but when dispatch does a better job of quickly processing that call and getting those tones dropped to the right station, it speeds everything up. So it certainly takes, it takes that level of attention to detail by everyone. So those are what contribute to the 90th percentile. I would submit that that's representative of what contributed to the average. But remember, the 90th percentile, if we took 10 calls and lined them up and we said, that 9th call in rank order from fastest to get there to slowest to get there, we would count over 9 and say that is the 90th percentile. But if all of a sudden we had calls that went from 1%, say that they're 30 seconds, 40 seconds, 50 seconds, and then that 90th percentile call was, like what it says it is, that it was 11 minutes and 31 seconds. If the majority of those calls fell well below that 11 minutes and 30 seconds, it would pull the average down significantly, even though the 90th percentile could still stay the same. The 90th percentile is a much harder standard to adhere to, and that's why we benchmark against it. But that's a little bit of some of the reasons why that could occur. And, yeah. Does that answer your question, Mr. Cooper?
Yeah, pretty much.
As best I'm able, at least.
Yes, except, maybe there's something I'm not understanding here, but the 90th percentile, it says 11.31, is that
Yep,
correct?
yep, so,
And on this thing, it says 8.37,
so this is what's called the total reflex time.
okay?
And so it includes that call processing time. And then, but the way that historically, and Carrie, correct me if I'm wrong, but that it had been reported on to the board was just the time from dispatch until we got on scene. And one of the things I want to do is, because that's all these numbers are part of, although we don't directly own, we're accountable for all that time. And so we wanted to include the different portions of it in what they call the total reflex time, which is from the moment someone calls 911 until the time that we arrive on scene. So that's why the difference exists between the two numbers.
Thank you. Mhm. So in your chief's report, it says 8 minutes and 37 seconds. Oh, it's just a typo. Oh,
Oh, okay, all right.
because I was getting pretty excited.
Yeah, I'm sorry to disappoint you. So Carrie, did we, because I remember before it was not the whole time, but refresh my memory, have we been keeping the whole time this whole year? The total reflex time is what's, okay, all right, I'm sorry, I misspoke.
Okay. Well, thank you.
Gene?
Time on scene, it can be kind of fool you as well, because that's not time at the patient.
That's true, especially at some of these remote locations
That's
or
right.
when it's difficult to access. I mean, it could just be off the roadside, but 30 feet off the roadside.
That's
And
exactly right.
Yep.
Plus gathering equipment and
That's true.
hustling it back, what have you, that can eat up the time.
Yep.
Interesting.
Yeah, it'd be interesting. And so with the Invisio product, we'll know more later in this week on some of this stuff will be able to be automated. You'll have better real-time access to it or near real-time access to it. And one of the things I'd like to start capturing too is the back-end service time, because as transport destinations change, say if the emergency room here is either because of staffing or just because of the number of walk-ins or other sources of business they receive, more calls get pushed further out, then we would still, all this would still look the same as far as the fact that when we were dispatched and got on scene, but all of a sudden our total committed time for that call may increase, by 40 minutes. And by knowing what that total committed time is, we can also look and say, hey, you know what? That may be a reason why those have increased, because if a unit, say from station 1, is committed longer to one event, say an ambulance, then it's more likely that the next ambulance that's coming to another call in this area comes from somewhere else. So that's another reason we want to capture that, so we kind of use that data a little bit more effectively to kind of guide decisions and look for trends. Any other questions on the call processing? Or on the total response time?
No comment.
Okay, so the next graph here shows what we see as our summertime increase. A couple of things of interest is that within district, Station 1 actually had more calls within their first due, within the area that they primarily respond to, the village, West Sedona, than Station 3 did, which is not normally the way it is. Normally that's kind of inverted. And then as you can see also that Station 5, who lags behind Station 6 during the winter months, has now all of a sudden launched above them in both
Interesting.
in district and everything. But we have more calls to Slide Rock, more people recreating out in the woods, and a lot more backcountry, more MVAs, that kind of stuff. So, all right, grant activity. We still have 2 grants submitted and pending. You can see there, and it's in your packet as well, the CRM numbers, or the CRR numbers. The 2 incidents of note were that I chose to kind of highlight here were 2 wildland incidents. One was a series of fires along 179 that created some angst for us for a while, because multiple ignitions. It could be like it ended up being. It could be an accident, or it could be someone purposely causing multiple ignitions. So without giving away too many details, while multiple units responded to the incidents, the number that were appropriate to manage those incidents, and the battalion chief handled that work, then I coordinated with the Forest Service And we pre-position between the two of us resources in other areas that have potential and that may have a difficult time getting resources to them, so we could see if something happened in a different area, you know, because of someone's actions that we had people positioned, and we weren't all kind of drawn to that one spot, especially with Highway 179 being closed.
So you
Yes, sir.
actually staged personnel in various locations while that one was going?
That's correct, and we coordinated with the Forest Service to make sure that between the two of us, that we had somebody at least to get eyes on quickly if there was an incident, to find out what may be threatening. So, but fortunately, it was an accident. You know, the cause of it was accidental and not purposeful, but at the time, we weren't certain about that, so we kind of
But
hedged it.
nevertheless, looking for a pattern, what have you, is something that, you know, is involved here. So.
Yes, sir. Yeah, most definitely. Gene, Al,
Does
sorry.
Slide Rock generate a lot of calls through the course of a summer?
Yes, sir.
It does.
They do. Matter of fact, if you were to pick like one geographic area in the canyon that produces the most calls, it would be Slide Rock. Just because of their significant number of visitation. And the hotter the water gets, the more slippery the rocks get too.
So it's people falling, hitting their head on the rocks and stuff like
Yep.
that?
Primarily it's what we call ground level falls. There is also some instances where it's heat related events. There's also people that were choose to jump off some of the rock features into the water, and they pick a bad place to do it, or the water's too shallow. That's led to calls before as well. But I'd say Dave or Ed, tell me if I'm wrong, but I think the primary the thing is ground level falls. Is that fair? Slip and slides. But it's hard, when you fall. Especially when your feet come all the way out from underneath you. It's no fun. Yeah, it's called Slide Rock, right? Good point.
Super rock.
All right. So the training highlights, I think I'll just pick a couple things to hit on. One here is that we got firefighter Sam Fry, who was here on light duty for an on-duty injury, and he went around and went to all the different facilities, tied in with all the different captains, the different station locations, and generated a list of different actions that need to be taken, corrections that need to be taken to address some shortcomings with facilities. He's provided Chief Lukowski at that, and we're basically triaging them out into what the crews can do on duty, what we need to bring a trade in to do in the near term, and what we need to allocate towards capital towards in the future to correct. So this is part of that effort to get away from those large core construction numbers that were for the remodels, and identify more of what needs to be done, and be able to assign a dollar amount to that. So that's in process. Another thing is, Keona and Heidi came back all jazzed about the different things that go to SHRM, and I think I don't know if there's a operational equivalent to SHRM that you just call things by SHRM after a long time, but it's the Society of Human Resource Managers, and so it was some of the stuff that provided Keona with continuing education towards getting credentialed in that area, and since Heidi is a backup for that, her also, and from the feedback that I received, that the classes had a lot of applicability to the events going on within the district, and gave us some information on how to align our actions with best practice. And then the Lars Romig, so our short haul attendants, we have 6 of them, and so each one of these short haul attendants has to do quarterly training to maintain currency with DPS. So they're the affectionately, I used to be in we call them dope on a rope, the person that hangs underneath the helicopter. And
That's cold.
I know. God. And so the Lars Romig, periodically people, it's a higher risk activity than what the norm is for the rest of our responses. And periodically people have kind of had enough doing that. And then we end up getting a new crew member. We still maintain that level of 6. And so Lars Romig, he was is the latest addition to that crew, completed his initial training. And with his backcountry and mountain bike experience and everything, I think he'll be a great asset to that. He's fit and fearless, which are 2 of the essential things you have to be to be that person. So, and DPS does a wonderful job operating the aircraft that we work under. So, and kind of a hint towards the future there. So it has been the case ever since, at least since I've been acting the chief's position, that we report training and education statistics in the number of classes and attendees and the total training hours. And one of the things we're going to be working towards, and I'm going to put Ed on the spot, but I think by January we could have it this way, is that we're going to have, there's this thing called the Kirkpatrick model of training, and it's kind of the industry standard for military use it, progressive organizations, because what it does is it measures training effect on the work you do in your mission. So instead of saying that, this is the number of trainings and classes, we're going to work to align the reporting, so we're actually reporting on how the training that we've conducted is impacting our ability to improve service in the field. It's a lot easier to report it this way, but it's less meaningful. So we're going to work on continuing to improve that. Stay tuned. Donation, there's $900 worth of office equipment donated. Correspondence and thank yous, I'd ask that you ignore that word. Those are the same words from last month. I failed to update that in it, but all those, the different thank you letters that we received are in your board packet. Some of the significant events, we talked about the backcountry calls. The number of backcountry calls has doubled. Chief Cochran, I believe, was actually the one that wrote this up, but there was a response to one of these UTV accidents that they actually logged the number of miles that it took to get to the incident. So we wonder why some of those calls that we have, those backcountry calls, some of them require extended commitment by resources because we're off the beaten path and they're on a foot trail somewhere in the wilderness where they can't. But some of the other ones that have challenged us are as these ATV routes start reaching further out there towards Wapaki and towards Kasner and all that it's and they're rough routes, a lot of them, that it's much more difficult to get to those people. So on this one call, there's 25.2 miles driven in and out to access that. And of that, almost a third of it was on ATV trails. So without our the specialized equipment that we have for that, it would significantly delay our transport times. Yes, sir, Al?
I notice the inventory of ATVs at the 2 or 3 retailers that have them is substantial. Are they really that many ATVs out there on the back roads that are, I mean, because potentially most of them are amateur hot rod drivers, and
Truth.
I would think you'd be out there often.
Yes, I believe they do, because they, like you said, they keep purchasing more. So I think the business model that they're operating under supports having more because they're renting more, and that's true. I think just anecdotally looking at the different people that have wrecked, there's the same thing with snake bites. It's weird. The main people that get snake bites are 16 to 25-year-old males. Yeah, imagine that. Yeah, well, yeah, probably, or at least not risk averse. Yeah, and so it's the same thing with these vehicles, and they handle so much differently, and because they have a narrow wheelbase, they tip on their side easier, so people go around corners or off camber, and I think that's probably the most common one is, or people that miss a corner.
Are the injuries substantial?
Yeah, some of them sure have been. Yep. Are the injuries substantial? Yeah, some of them have been life-threatening injuries. Yep.
An incident recently happened in Southern California where a woman disappeared for 4 days. And it might be interesting to look at an after-action report of that occurrence and the rapidity of the rescue response and how it occurred. It sounded like all the right elements came together. She was found safe.
Oh, nice.
And she was merely 2.5 miles away from the original location where she was last seen. So there may be other elements to it, but I think more importantly, the after-action report, if it's available, may be helpful for areas like this.
Yeah, I'll look for that. I tell you what, lost person behavior. We're fortunate with Coconino County. We have Aaron Dick, who's one of the sergeants in charge of search and rescue, but he's an expert on that. I mean, he wouldn't say that. He's very humble, but he is. He gets called to Alaska and other places to train them. And whenever we end up on large area searches, I have to call them because there's a certain science to that. And I'll look for that after action review because there is a lot to learn from that. It's not as intuitive as you would think on what the best course of action to locate someone in a timely manner is. And there's a lot of variables that until I started to learn more about it, I didn't recognize were as being important. So I'll look for that. Thank you. Wildland fires, we've kept medic teams employed almost constantly on different fires around the state, which is a good alternative revenue stream, and it also provides you guys opportunity to go out there and improve the safety for those firefighters out in the field. And then, there's a lightning caused fire on June 22nd. That later in the same day or the next day, the Burger King thing. I have that up on a different slide, but yeah, that another little fire outside of Burger King that was due to some malfunctioning equipment. But this fire, the Deer Pass fire, I think it went to 8 acres, maybe 10 acres, and good coordinated response, and it just back through the grass, but the grass is continuous, so things do move through it. This was kind of cool. I just thought I'd highlight it for a moment, but so these guys, and it wasn't an original idea, but I loved it. It was a great idea. It showed the different equipment that each of these crews members, that they use for the different types of calls: suppression response, technical rescue, and then wildland fire. And then seeing how much weight they added to them, and it was a really good call because reading the comments and stuff on Facebook, it added to a lot of the awareness of the public as to what the equipment weighs and how taxing that can be. Also made me realize that I'm quite a bit bigger than both Cave and Pace. Another issue that occurred, a couple issues that occurred concurrently, was a couple calls in Fay Canyon, one in Fay Canyon, and then one that happened, thank you, at Bell Rock. And so collectively, it was at least 3 hours that they're committed to the Bell Rock one, and I can't remember, about the same amount of time, if I remember correctly, Dave, to the other call, maybe a little bit longer to the Fay Canyon one.
They went out almost simultaneously, probably within 10 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
And then as we were finishing up the Bell Rock call, we had another call.
Okay, yeah, so 3 of them back to back. So those calls, and we're working on getting some better sun protection for the crews, lighter shirts, things like that. Our blues are good, but when they get out on these calls, especially when they're doing 3 of them back to back, having hats that keep the sun off of their heads and shirts that keep them from getting overheated, along with their backpacks and the water and everything. It's a challenge making sure that we maintain their hydration and everything as well, because you never know when it's going to happen like that, where it's just one after another after another.
UPS Air Rescue on that, they had just come from the Grand Canyon, and they had done a rescue off of Humphreys, and then they came to do our first one, and we were going to use them on the second one, so, fortunately, we have that resource available to us.
Yeah, and Ranger, they do such a wonderful job. And this is the 2 fires I was talking about in one day. There was a small fire up by Encinoso, and the cell phones are turned on now. The Verizon service is turned on in Oak Creek Canyon. I don't know, because I looked at the calls. You couldn't really tell which tower it came off of, but and in that area you had decent cell service on Verizon before. But it is reassuring to know that now that cell service is more contiguous through the canyon, and so now it's less likely that someone who witnesses an event will be delayed in reporting that event, which that allows us to be more effective, whether it's a medical emergency or a wildland fire.
Also, kind of on this with the cell towers being up, I was able to contact the battalion chief in charge of the Forest Service, so we were able to coordinate resources myself.
Nice.
Chief, is that a better way to communicate on cell phone with the towers up versus your radios?
Yeah, it's a little more informal.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of, it's not on the radio.
Yeah.
So it's more of a, what do you really need? And sometimes the radio traffic gets overwhelming with tactical stuff where
Right.
you get on there and do more strategic other things. Looking at long term, you want to keep something, in town in case something else goes over. It's kind of hard to do that over the radio.
So we end up actually using both then.
Yeah. Yep. All right, this is a bummer. Tammy, I was like, you're not really gonna, are you? Yeah, but she is. Tammy's retiring. I believe most of y'all know that already. I saw her email, but she grew up with SFD. Tammy, she was working in the dispatch center whenever I got hired, and she and I had a pretty candid conversation. Apparently, I was less nice back then. I don't know. That was at least her opinion. I was maybe a little bit more gruff. So I believe her. She's an honest person, so it must have been that way. But when she started GIS, she was self-taught, and she's really taken that a long ways, and has such a passion for making sure that things are right. And it's great because you don't have to tell her when there's an issue, because she'll hear it or she'll see it, and she'll anticipate it, and she'll work to correct it. Say, hey, this is what I was thinking I might do, and I was doing this analysis, and this is one of the things. So mapping's such a crucial part of what we do. I would like to take a minute and read what she wrote, because I thought it was nice. And Tammy is not one for public speaking, so we asked her if she wanted a walkout ceremony, and she was absolutely not. She wouldn't show up if there was one. But she will have. We're working on coordinating. We'll make sure to let the board know, but having a little luncheon for her.
For sure.
And she said that she would do that as long as we do not ask her to speak. Anyways, she said, I think the best thing that we have to say when we retire is that we made a difference in the fire service, whether you're a chief, BC, captain, firefighter, EMT, administration, mechanic, IT support, dispatch, volunteer, or a board member. This is especially true. Everyone who works here is a hero in their own right, whether they are on scene or supporting those that are. There is no better career to have than one that serves others and gives the opportunity to be there for someone having the worst day of their life. Thank you all for the great company, the hard work, the dedication, the potlucks, the parties, and the laughs. Thanks for giving of yourself as you do every day. I am so proud and grateful that I'm part of this wonderful team we call the Sedona Fire District. I thought that was, in lieu of Tammy speaking in public, I thought I could read her email, and that would have to suffice. And it was very well written, so I appreciated her sentiments.
Boy, it's very sad to see Tammy go.
It is.
I've been hearing about her skills for years, and they're impressive. I'm wondering about the succession plan.
Yeah, so that's a great question. So right now, she has a date that she has established as far as the date that she's going to retire, but she has not sold her house. She has a house that was her mother's in the Midwest that they're gonna live in, and so until such time, she said that she would continue to work, and I told her she didn't have to give me 2 weeks' notice, but as much as we can get out of her is great. And later this week, one of the things we're going to work on is outreach. She's been helping us with that. But I think that with the salary schedule that we have for that position, that we should be competitive and we should be able to get the resources. And she's already helping us vet those. And there may be a need to have her actually be able to have VPN access to support us remotely for some time, and also to kind of onboard that new person. And she said that she'd be willing to do that even if she's already moved at that time. But it's there's different protocol and naming conventions for GIS data, and I think Tammy has done a good job of maintaining those, but that's still only part of it. I mean, different things like datums, like some things are in NAD83, but how you take a round ball and mathematically make it into squares is complex, and different data use different methods to do that. And Tammy's become very good at figuring that out when things are shifted the wrong way and all those different layers don't line up. So I'm most definitely going to take her up on that resource as we transition, because she's been a huge asset.
Without a doubt, she'll be missed. That's for sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I agree. All right, there's no purchase orders to report over $10,000.
That's good.
Yeah. So I'm not going to read through all this, but I would like to just let y'all know that in your packet is the final technical report, and there's a few different parts of that packet that I wanted to highlight, because I think they're important, and I think it's important to kind of go on record for. So the process that we engaged in netted 62 applicants, got us down to a final candidate. And throughout that whole process, everything that we did was defensible, it was validated, and in some ways, it would be easy to look at, because there was an upfront cost with hiring an external professional to come in here and guide us through that process. However, that also allowed us to leverage technology in a way that we'd never done before to accomplish what we needed to accomplish. An example would be the Skype interviews when we were down to 16 applicants. Those applicants were able to stay home. We didn't have to pay airfare and everything, which would be customary to bring them here. And we were able to sit as a group and go through all that with Dr. Davis being remote at a different location and coordinating that. And I also think that when we look at the performance instrument that we developed, and the fact that we actually went and looked at the different competencies for the position and went through a job analysis data collection process that has defensible methodology, it helps us to make sure that we're asking for the right things. Because, you know, we all want a good chief, but that's a pretty ambiguous thing to say. Yeah, you got to figure out what good is, right? And so I think through the whole process, I felt like I learned a lot. I felt like it was, it helped other people. Keon has said it before. It gave us a glimpse into what right looks like. So, it's our intent to take what we've learned and apply it in other areas, and continue to kind of up our game. And this is, you see, this is the second part of it. There's multiple different appendixes, and then, you know, I appreciated this last comment about the performance management process that's in the report. It says the process should also be reviewed after each cycle. The proposed form is simply a vehicle to engage in performance conversations. The focus is best directed towards achieving goals, directing competencies, and developing competencies and acquiring new skills. So in, you know, nerdy industrial organizational psychology speak, basically what that's saying is didn't want to create a process that was so cumbersome that you were so fixated on the process that you lost what the intent is. And that's a good reminder for us here, because it's, you know, we want to achieve the goals of the organization to you know, be fiscally responsible, to meet our mission, and develop the competencies it takes to do that goals. Right now we're talking about the chief, but applying that sort of a framework to other positions as well will allow us to acquire those new skills we need to become more effective. So that's the goal of the performance management system. And I think we've made some good inroads towards accomplishing something that we haven't had before. All right. So,
You know, Chief, before you move on, I didn't know if you had any more to say on that, but I think throughout that whole process, the thing that was most difficult for us as board members is that we as board members as a whole couldn't talk to each other during the whole process here. And although two of us were on the committee and were able to talk to each other, the other three were in the dark. But I think what helped was that they put their faith in the process that we were trying to develop, and they were part of various aspects of the process where in turn we didn't know what they were doing because we couldn't be told. So it was difficult at the very least as we had to, the constraints that we had under, you know, placed upon us as board members. So if there was any, I wouldn't say deficiency, but just obstacle to overcome was the fact that as a board member following open meeting laws and rules, it's difficult. It was probably the toughest thing that, and frustrating, I could only imagine for, well, you folks, but also us, because we wanted to give information out, but we just couldn't. And so with all that said, in the end, the funny part was we all agreed on the same person as far as who our chief was going to be. So it was difficult, but we made it happen. So again, thank Dr. Davis, thank all of us for, all of you guys for contributing, and I think we have the knowledge now to move forward if we ever do this again.
I believe so, and I think we have, I know that me personally that this has helped improve my skill set, and I'm going to continue to work on, you know, adding to that as we do this in the future. But it was a great experience, and I can appreciate, you know, some of the challenges and frustrations for the other members. And I hope as you look through this report and you see the process in its entirety, that, you know, if we utilize this in a different capacity downstream, I have no intent in using it for a chief's process anytime in the near future. I don't have anything to say about it, but that you guys, that it'll be we'll have a shared understanding of what the process looks like that we didn't have before. So, thank you. Okay, so you know, there's a couple different issues that came up that I put these in the chief's report, and obviously if the board wishes to have any further action or information on that, on these in the future, I'd be happy to provide it. So this is kind of a high level view, and the first one I want to talk about was our airport response. So there is, you know, our airport, if we framed it against the external standard, which is the FAA Part 139 for airport designation, then we have a non-towered airport, has no regular scheduled commercial flights, and so it does not fall underneath the requirements for fire suppression staffing that FAA Part 139 lay out for designated airports. If we did have a designated airport, there would be crash rescue capabilities that we have to have that would be dependent upon the different types of port and the amount of commercial traffic that comes in and out of there. And you see there, that's in 13 Part 139. There's 13 of those Part 139 airports designated in Arizona. That's not our airport. Those are the other ones that have to have that. So, what have we done with the gap there? Is that why we do not have people that are trained in airport crash rescue. We have coordinated with the folks at the airport to make sure that we have a clear understanding on the appropriate processes and the procedures to enter not only the airport grounds but to cross runways, do things like that, and then what our role is in a response. The next slide will talk about the different types of responses that we've had, but this focus of our training on safe airport operations and how to appropriately access the aircraft in the different areas where we end up finding them, I think is the appropriate focus for us right now. I do think that when we, as we work further towards accreditation, as soon as we get done with the Lexipol with our policies and we start working towards that, one of the things that we do there is we analyze the different threats that we have in the district and figure out what we should, take a more deliberate effort to prioritize those and to make sure that we're allocating training and cost for or money for equipment, everything appropriately. And that may shed some additional light onto this, and it may kind of point us in a different direction. But right now, not everything. I don't think everything's a zero-sum game when it comes to additional training. But to train and equip our firefighters to a higher level for airport response, given what those responses tend to be, I don't necessarily think it's warranted. But I do. I do intend to include that in our entire risk analysis. Gene?
I agree. However, we have very large jets coming in, private jets, what have you, with however many passengers. And Al's office is up adjacent to the airport, what have you. We've seen large jets come in. Well, I was in his office on occasion. All it takes is one incident where one of those jets go off the runway or make a bad landing, a skid, whatever it is, with jet fuel on the runway. And we don't have any fuel or foam systems up there.
That's correct.
And it would seem to me that the responsibility then is with the airport, knowing what the possible outcomes could be. In a crash there would be worldwide news. If with injury, it would be worldwide news. But it seems to me the responsibility is to investigate firefighting equipment, which would be a trailerized foam unit that could be towed to an area where an engine company could attach their hose lines and direct the foam onto the appropriate area. But it seems to me the responsibility is then with the airport. Just my opinion.
Understand it, and I don't know a lot about airport firefighting, and I don't want to speak out of turn, but I would be willing to work with my counterparts and to look at what that training would look like to maintain proficiency and something like that. Because the other side of it is I would, and I know you're not suggesting this, but I hate to send firefighters out to deal with an incident that they haven't been properly trained to deal with, and assume that the hazards are the same as what they're used to, and then have that end up in a bad way. If you look at in the past year, these are the calls that we've had at the airport. 4 were for lift assists, 3 were actually aircraft accidents. All those were non-injury. We had 3 transports where we were transporting a patient to an aircraft up there, and they had 2 standbys. There's lots of aircraft that are registered out of the EU countries where part of their requirement is to have a piece of equipment on standby. And it's pretty funny because they send me these very long lists of questions, and you can tell that they're not used to dealing with such a small airport, because the questions would be like probably the same questions they ask LAX before they land. And I had to look up a lot of the words because I was unfamiliar with it. But there has been those bad events, and You know, and this is not statistically driven, this is my anecdotal recall on those events, in my mind, that have had the significant outcomes have ended up going off of the runway. And so, you know, that presents a whole new set of hazards with all the vegetation and everything down there, as if, you know, how we access those. And that is something that we have talked about. Like, you know, what's our best way to get in there? All right, if it's on fire, which way do we do this? Things like that. And unfortunately, those have had pretty, not all of them have been multiple fatality incidents, but they're the ones that I can remember that had really bad outcomes. And, you know, it's that they've been off the end of the runway. Al?
Chief, I remember some discussion a few years ago about, since they do tend to go off the end of the runway, and in some cases they could walk out, but that is a very steep, cactus-filled.
It is very
Has there been any
cactus-filled, yeah.
discussion about blading in a sort of a path that would be not so horrible to get people walking in and out and with a stretcher? And because right now it's a thicket.
No conversations that I've been a party to. I would submit that if we did choose to entertain that idea or engage the Forest Service on that they'd have to do a NEPA study, you know,
You go.
and that there would be a lot of people when they came to the public comment portion that would resist scarifying the side of the slope where it's visible from so many different areas. Not to say that it couldn't be done, but you know, yeah.
Chief, let me ask you a question. So remember about 3 years ago, something like 95, 6, 7, when we had Southwest flights coming in? Do you remember that?
I don't.
Okay,
I
so
didn't
we
start
used
here
to have
until 98.
Southwest
So
coming in. Yeah, well, it stopped because they didn't have enough, you know, people. So, but they used to come in 737s and so forth. And I have a client that has a really big jet that comes in. So I'm wondering, you know, what did we do back then? You know, were there requirements when the large jets were coming in? And can we even get close to doing something just that would maybe close to that, since we do have large jets coming in? I mean, McCain's almost was, you know, in the medium to small, and now we're having much larger ones come in.
yep. And I'm going to defer to my resident pilot because he may have some information on that. Are you not a pilot?
Not a pilot. So going back to Board Member Camello's question, and when Chief Kazian was here, there was some discussions about building a trail down for access, and the Forest Service was not, let's say they weren't very enthusiastic about doing that.
But the fence did get moved down the hill a little bit.
If it did, it may have, I'm not aware of that, but I know there were some discussions with the Forest Service and what they could do off the end of the runway, and they were not enthusiastic supporters of that plan.
Interesting.
As far as the size of the jets, it's my understanding that about the largest jet that can come in is Global Challenger, which is probably what, a 22-person aircraft.
I don't know. I've seen them up there. They seem big.
Anyway, the Part 139 designation for airports, in order to reach that threshold, you have to have regularly scheduled commercial flights and at least employing 10,000 passengers a year. So if you're not doing 10,000 passenger trips per year, then you don't meet that threshold.
So that may be how that
Yeah,
would
because we
happen
were
before.
doing Southwest was coming in about twice a day for quite some time, but I don't think that would have met the threshold. I'm not sure.
It depends on the size of the plane and
Yeah.
how many people they were putting
Right.
on it. Yeah.
Al?
I think it's important, though, to, you know, perhaps look into something that would be maybe in between. So in case something does occur, jet fuel, you know, something like that would occur, and we could take care of it. I don't know what would be in between.
Yeah, again, I'm trying not to be too subjective here because like I said, I don't know very much about that. But if the board has interest, I could present what those costs would be, because it's certainly gonna be trade-offs with other parts of our mission if we
Right.
choose to engage in something that has and whether those trade-offs are appropriate to undertake or not. I think I could help you make that decision more clearly if I provided you some better data on what that looked like as
Would
far
the
as training and
airport
everything
be
else.
willing at all to be involved in that?
I'm not certain. And involved is one thing. Give us money to pay for it.
Right.
Is really what I want.
Well, that's what I say
But,
when I say involved. I
okay,
mean money.
yeah, and I don't know. I have not had that conversation with him.
Chief, I think what brought this issue to light was the fact that we have had multiple incidents up there. And what concerned me most about it was, do we have an ongoing dialogue with management and the boards up at the airport? Are we both doing what we're supposed to be doing? Based on that type of airport with that rating, do we have the correct equipment up there, and do we have the correct training as a fire entity on board? If not, then how do we get there?
Clear.
And with that said, are we at NFPA standards? Are we at FAA standards for the type of airport that we have? So if those things are in place and we're doing what we're supposed to be doing, then we're pretty much golden. If we're not, how do we find out where we're deficient or where we prevail, and weigh and decide where we need to go? That was kind of what I was kind of striving to see if, and you've answered those, but it seems as though, is there dialogue between us and the airport as far as all these issues?
If I may, again, I have done some investigation is on my own, interested because of my observation up there, and the time that it takes for the closest available unit from the district to climb the hill and get on scene. And small trailerized pickup towable trailers with foam generating units are available and used in airports around the world. And so again, I believe it'd be the responsibility of the airport to do that investigation on that kind of a rig, buying time while we're getting up the hill. And it's merely attaching a 2.5 on there and with a foam generator to suppress the fumes from the jet fuel and so on to prevent any further fire. So it's all doable. It's just a matter of money and responsibility.
Member McCarthy, I think you're bringing up an important point of who is responsible for it financially.
Right.
And that's something also we need clarity about, because it does seem like the airport would be responsible for what you're speaking about, to have the foam on site ready for us to be able to use. So it's a big issue, is who is responsible.
Who has the biggest liability?
Well, yeah, I guess those could be the same or they could be different, but I think what I'm hearing is that more of a gap analysis as far as like what our current operational capabilities are, and what external standards say that there should be a different and potentially higher. Find out what those standards are, whether it be an NFPA or whether it be the FAA standards, and then at least determine what that gap is. And then if once we decide what that gap is, engage with the airport to see if there's an opportunity for them to assist in closing that gap,
True.
and then report back to y'all.
And I'm just wondering, in terms of safety inspection, thinking of when my office was inspected, I had to make sure I had an operative fire extinguisher. We're talking about something a little bigger here, but in that same concept. Are airports, small airports, required to have fire extinguishing, large fire extinguishing equipment?
As far as the fire code would be concerned, any commercial occupancies would fall under the fire code as far as portable handheld extinguishers. As far as the larger fire extinguishers that you typically see at airports, there is no requirement in the fire code that I'm aware of. That probably would fall under the FAA. The FAA has they've got quite extensive requirements as far as if you're going to do airport aircraft crash rescue, or the types of requirements for fire extinguishers like the big wheeled units at the airports. As far as I know, that's nothing in the fire code. We do, in fact, I was just talking to the airport manager yesterday about getting in and re-inspecting the hangars up there in the coming months, hopefully. We'll get that started. There's 109 hangars up there, so our goal is to maybe start knocking out a few every week until we can work through them. But yeah, I believe that the larger wheeled fire suppression units would be part of the FAA regulations, and I'm not intimately familiar with those.
Thank you.
Chief, with this whole issue being in your report, it's not as though we can ask you to, or direct you to do any action on this. But I do believe it merits being agendized on a future meeting to discuss some of the very points that we're talking about.
Certainly.
With that said, I would like to see it agendized, if not August, probably September, to get that ball rolling.
Yes, sir.
So
I'd ask you wait till September if it pleases the board.
That'd be fine. Yeah, we've been a
And
little
then
busy,
we'll,
so.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you for your time and engagement on that. Let's hit another topic that nobody cares about. Burn permits. All right. So after listening to the lady that spoke at the last board meeting, and then we did have one member of the public that chose to provide a perspective as well in an email. And so looking at the standards, so the first thing I did then I was like, okay, what would give us the authority to change it? How do we have the authority to do what we're doing right now? And that authority in Arizona resides in this chapter, Title 18 of the Environmental Quality, Chapter 2, Air Pollution Control. I'd be happy to provide the board with a very wordy statute, but two of the key points there is that there's a thing called an independent authority to permit fires. And so that means that the authority of a county to permit fires by a rule adopted under Arizona revised statutes and includes only these three counties, Maricopa, Pinal, and Pima. So they can make rules. Everyone else, in a position like we are, is a delegated authority. So Arizona Department of Environmental Quality is the one that makes these rules. They're the ones that says what we can and cannot permit, can restrict by permit, and we are able to enforce their rules as a delegated authority. So when it talks about unlawful open burning, and this is the key part of the chapter, I think it's important to what we're talking about today, it says, notwithstanding any other rule in this chapter, a person shall not ignite, cause to ignite, or permit to be ignited, allow or maintain any open fire in a county without independent authority, so that's us, to permit fires except as provided in the ARS. So it's like a backwards way of saying that you can do what the statute says and you can't do anything else outside of that. So then you go to the statute, and outdoor fires exempt from a permit. So the following fires do not require opening burning permits from the director or a delegated authority. Fires used for cooking food, or warmth of people, recreation purposes, branding animals, orchard heaters, and proper disposal of flags under 4 USC 8. So we, as a delegated authority, we don't control these. Their rules expressly prohibit us requiring permitting for these. So as we're considering what we can and cannot do, you gotta take these off the table, because we can't. The one way that we do control recreational fires is when we go to a level 2 burn restrictions. And as y'all probably know from the emails and stuff earlier, we pay a lot of attention to that, to the conditions and whether or not a warrant is going up and we try to do that in a coordinated effort. I guess someone could say, well, you can just say that it's always in a level 2 burn restriction. I think that'd be inconsistent with the intent by a long ways, and it would also mean that we would be restricting people from doing something that was not necessarily an unsafe act and that was well within their purview, except for the fact that we manipulated an ordinance to provide a mechanism to do that. But that's outside of the intent of what that's for. The fire restrictions are designed to look at the 7 different factors and determine whether or not conditions are likely for a fire to grow quickly, and where the risk outweighs the benefits, whether they be the benefits of enjoying the fire or the other activities take place. And then if you put in those restrictions, you put them in for everything that falls under that class. So to restrict certain things with commercial operations, hot work, that kind of stuff. And that comes, doing that in a way that isn't supported by the data would come with its own set of problems, I'm sure, when it came to what we're doing. And it would also create more of an enforcement problem for for them.
Chief,
So-
if I could just interject, I think it might be helpful to say or to point out that the concern of these two citizens was that they didn't want people to be burning debris and whatever, that was their concern, that those fires could get out of hand, just so we know why we're talking about this.
Yes, ma'am, and I should have brought that up. And it too, in the statute, it goes into great detail to say what can't be burned and what can be burned. And so if someone's burning trash, that's illegal. So the example of third world countries and roadside burning, that is not, we do not issue permits for people to burn trash. The open burning, it talks exactly about what it is. It talks about the fact that it's, that it has to be done in a safe manner. It lays all that out there. So, the last part of this is so with that overarching authority, then we have a burn policy and our burn permit season. Our burn season for our spring season is typically May 1st to, or beg your pardon, March 1st to May 31st. And those are the hours that people can burn within 07 and 1400. And the fall, September to November 30th, between 07 and 1400. So the reason we don't burn in the heat of the summer is probably pretty obvious, right? The higher fire danger, so we don't issue burn permits then. And the reason we don't do it in the winter is because there's other sources of pollutants that fall in that 10 part per million, the same wood smoke stuff, from whether it be from people's fires from their wood stoves, things like that. And you have that high pressure that sets up that keeps that smoke down. So when they looked at all these different factors, tried to take into account all the different things that come into play there and look at the air quality as a whole. And when you look at the air quality at Station 4, there's an air quality monitor. 35 parts per million is deemed to be unhealthy for smoke-sensitive people. If it's over, you guys know, the time-weighted average, it's over 8 hours, above 35 parts per million. And these small events that occur next to someone's home that I live in Flagstaff. The way I keep my house cool is I leave all my windows open at nighttime. Somebody is burning piles of their leaves, and they don't get the fire on time, and I have my windows open at nighttime, and it smells like smoke. I don't like that either. But there's times when these burn permits are acceptable. When that occurs, that's not following the guidance of the permits. It's between 07 and 1400. By 1400, it's supposed to be extinguished. So it becomes a challenge to address this in an appropriate way when the examples are given are oftentimes things that fell outside of what the standards are already. And enforcement of the current standards for those situations that were identified would solve the problem. And we don't have the authority to say that you just can't burn. We have the authority to enforce the rules that ADQ has, but we can't just say we're not going to do it.
Can I interject for 1 second?
Sure.
So I feel like I just want to qualify what our citizen was saying. She was concerned not just of the burning, but the citizens that were burning were mature, elderly, and the issue that she saw was that if it went out of control, they couldn't control it. So is there any way that we can have some kind of assistance program, maybe volunteers, or I don't know what it would be, for people over a certain age, maybe? I'm not sure. I don't know. This is just my thoughts. Probably not appropriate. I don't know if it's appropriate, but I'm saying it anyway. To help them because they have their right to burn items.
But Chief,
Does that make any sense?
if I can add, well, number one, I don't think we can age discriminate. That's kind
Yeah,
of like.
so I'm
who goes to that?
inappropriate. I
Yeah.
apologize.
That's all right.
But with that said, during the time period that it is allowable to burn, what are the parameters that can trump that, cancel that?
Sure.
That would coincide with, hey, it turned out to be windy today.
Yeah, and so what happens is individuals are issued a burn permit. When they come, right now everyone comes to Station 1 to get their burn permit. So when they do that, they have an opportunity to have an exchange with Jody or whomever it is that is issuing them the burn permit, explaining to them what the rules are. So that burn permit is good for a window of time. On the day that they wish to conduct their open burn, then they has these instructions on the burn permit, and they're explained to them. They call dispatch, and we have parameters for wind speed, humidities, things like that will make it a no burn day. and dispatch will advise them if it's okay to burn. Sometimes it's anticipated that the winds will meet those thresholds later in the afternoon, so it says, hey, this is a day that we burn until noon. Burning is allowed until noon today instead of 1400. So they have that near real-time exchange with the dispatcher, and then every morning at 08 when we have our tone test, then they'll say whether this is a burn day or a no burn day. So the crews that are on duty that day have that awareness that if they go by a place that maybe the last 3 days have been burn days and somebody's been taking care of some yard debris around their house and they've seen smoke from there, all of a sudden they're out that same day and they see smoke and it's a no burn day, they know that they need to go engage that person. So we're informed on a daily basis. The individual that is activating the burn permit is informed. The standards is that the area they have to have clear, the maximum size of it, the fact that they have to have water nearby. All that stuff is laid out in the burn permit. So I go down to okay, what events had of significance? Fires that escaped initial attack and created consequence for the community, and were any of those permitted and within the constraints of the permit when this occurred? So try to take it away from the one time I saw this person have a really big fire and turn it into something a little bit more at least defensible, I guess. And we think about it, so the large events that come to mind would be the Brins fire, the La Barranca fire, the Slide fire, and we can even add on the smaller end the Deer Pass fire recently. Deer Pass fire was lightning caused. The Brins fire was someone that had a campfire, an abandoned campfire, that was not allowed under current regulations where they had this fire, and that's what led to the Brins fire. The Slide fire was, again, a fire that was left unattended in an area where there was no campfires allowed. So that wasn't operated, that wasn't within the rules and the current rules without changing them. And then the La Barranca fire was a fence company doing work on a fence on a day when the requirement by the industrial fire code was that they had a fire watch. So the guy was welding under a hood, and then you'd have somebody else there outside of the hood with fire extinguisher in hand. So if any of these sparks ignited in the grass, and he didn't, so when he flipped his hood up, the fire was already too big for him to suppress, and it consequently ran up the side of the mountain. So none of the large events we had that we've had in the past, and I know backwards looking is always forwards looking, but would be prevented by having a more restrictive standard. But even with all that, I can't get past the fact that we don't have the enforcement authority. And so, I appreciate those folks' concern. I don't see it as an actionable item.
So with that said, Chief, if you were a neighbor of someone having an open burn, a permitted open burn, and you smell the smoke, you felt the wind, you felt the lack of humidity and temperature was up, what do you do as a next door neighbor?
Yeah, I'd say if I wasn't me, because it's funny, just the other day after we got the rain in Flagstaff, there was a bunch of smoke coming, and I went over there and checked on it. But they should call 911 if they feel like, if there's a concern. Call 911. We'll send it out as a special duty assignment. Crews will go out there and check on it. We're happy to do that. And there's always an opportunity there to speak to the individual, make sure that they understand what's going on. Certainly, people have that opportunity. I just think that we as a district we'd be kind of on a slippery slope if we tried to do anything more.
And Chief, in terms of the range of those 3 months in the spring and a couple in the fall, who sets that range? Because is that something we do have authority over and could shorten?
Yeah, we want to do it in council with ADEQ, just because there's those other things that contribute to air quality issues that they would want us to be considerate of. But if there's been plenty of years where we haven't had a spring burn season if we've had a very dry winter. And then all of a sudden, but that would become then that'd be a conditional response instead of saying this is the period of time that we're not going to, that would be something that we would say we're going to go into level 2 restrictions early. So that wasn't a very good answer to your question about if we could change them, but I could find out.
Specifically for the burn permits.
Right.
Do we have the authority to
I think we have the authority to move that some. I think that we would have to check with, I would want to check with ADEQ first and make sure, because if we said that, hey, let's bump that earlier in the winter, say, so we get a little bit further away from when we dry out a bunch, but still allow the same amount of time, there may be trade-offs there that I'm not considered. I don't know if John's got anything on that.
We are allowed to move those dates. In fact, 2 years ago, the fire marshals from the local jurisdictions got together and we all tried to basically follow the same dates. One jurisdiction does not because they don't, they allow burning the entire year unless they're in fire restrictions in their jurisdiction. But the rest of us all got together and said these are kind of the dates so that we're all on the same page. When somebody calls with a burn permit from Cottonwood or Sedona, dispatch knows that, yeah, everybody's in burn season right now where everybody's not in burn season, just to try to make it more consistent. Because the question always was, well, I can't burn here, but my friend over in Cottonwood, he's got a fire, and so we tried to eliminate a lot of those. But yes, we can move those dates.
I was thinking less about whether they are shifted from 1 month earlier. I'm talking about the time frame, the amount of time allowed. Just addressing the concerns of these two citizens that they find the burning problematic. Is there a way to do some accommodation of their concerns by shortening the total period in which people can burn?
Is it within a given day? Within the given day
Yeah,
itself?
well, I mean, like, instead of 3 months long, 2 months long, instead of, X days, shorter number of days. I'm not talking about when it occurs, but just the total amount of time per year
Sure,
that people can.
and I think we have the authority to change that. But again, it was a decision that all of the local jurisdictions got together and said, we were all pretty much on the same dates within a week or two. One jurisdiction may have started a week early and ended a week early, and we just kind of all agreed that we'll try to match each other's moves as much as possible.
Another point, if I may, about that is that, I would submit that most people that are utilizing, are getting a burn permit to do open burning, they have a finite amount of vegetation to remove. And so whether we do it in 3 months or we do it in 2 months, they're probably, this is just, subjective, but they're just gonna burn whatever they have in their yard that needs to be burned. One of the untoward consequences of restricting or shortening the time is that there may be those times when they're like, hey, we've got a burn permit until noon. Well, I'm gonna hurry up, try to get it done today because I only have 5 days left. And I wouldn't want to artificially create a sense of urgency that leads someone to make a bad decision. If at the end of the day, they're gonna burn for X number of days per year anyways to accomplish their goal.
Chief, since this is not an actionable item, is there a way of communicating with this one lady so that at least she knows that we all discussed this and it's been vetted and it's sort of, these are the rules, this is when somebody can burn, and thank you for your interest.
Yeah. I
happy
can
to talk
address
to her.
that. Their council member was in contact with them and did in fact relay the information the chief just described to them. So the woman would have been here today, but she had a prior commitment.
Well, she left today for Alaska.
Right. Yeah, the council member did
Okay.
did at least attempt to contact her.
Can I
There's
just
gonna
say
be a lot
something
of
in
smoke
brief?
up there, for reals. That whole place is on fire.
Just in brief, just so you all know, I wasn't trying to make any kind of inappropriate comment as to any kind of age discrimination whatsoever. I was just trying to be on her side and see if there's any way that we can help to further what she was requiring or requesting. I have very good intentions.
Oh, yeah,
No.
I didn't
No
misinterpret that at all.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, and I think too that other thing is that we have, there's this subjective data that goes way back actually that people are, what happened back in the day. And I think we've gotten better at communicating the requirements. I think we've gotten more stringent in the following the requirements, from making sure every day that like I said, that the weather's broadcast, that the crews know what it is, that they feel empowered to go out there and engage with those folks. So I think there's a lot of improvements process that have taken place since the period that was referenced in that email.
Thank you, Chief, for all your input on that.
Certainly. Okay, so social media outreach and engagement for the last 28 days. There you have it. New page likes 235. I think we're up to like 15,000 or something people. Post reach 96,000. New followers 244. The most engaged was on the anniversary, June 30th, of the fatalities on the Yarnell Hills fire, and 35,467 was the reach on that. Key messages that we engaged with the public last 28-day cycle on were wildfire preparedness again and evacuation, environmental exposures and preparedness, that hiking stuff, knowing what color your pee is. We tried to hit them from both ends on that, and there's a lot of positive comments on those sites. The impact of illegal parking on response, and then the week of remembrance. So, 1 week between there's multiple different fatality fires that occurred, and it's important for us, I think, as the agency that has a wildland fire response, to remember that customarily that last week of June, first week of July, is the high hazard period in the Southwest. So, yeah, those were the events we hit on. Hey, this is a bristlecone pine that I took a picture of that I thought was kind of cool, and that means that we're at the end of my report.
Thank you, Chief. Thank you for all the information there. Brings us up to our next item on the agenda, which is the discussion, possible action, review of, and approval of the cooperative for the Greater Flagstaff Area Fire Agency's All-Risk Emergency Intergovernmental Agreement.
So the IGA that had come before you before, there was some turnover of staff at Flagstaff, and some of the concerns that Mr. Whittington had in a previous edition of the contract were not appropriately memorialized in Flagstaff, and so they were not included in this version of the contract. So we have, me, Mr. Whittington, and myself with their chief, had conversations, and I learned a new word through that called novation. So to ensure that those concerns, because they weren't deal breaker for Mr. Whittington, but they're things he wanted to see in the future, are properly memorialized, so they're included in the next version, because all the other signers have already signed this agreement. So those are going to be added to the next version, and that process can be memorialized. It's called novation, and if I'm saying this wrong, please help me. But anyhow, so my ask is that we approve this contract. This is a mechanism to facilitate our initial attack responses, a legal mechanism that allows us to have that shared response. We don't have to send stuff, and we're not responsible for what, under this agreement, people send to us. It's their responsibility to have it credentialed. It's their responsibility to cover the cost. And again, we try to reciprocate, but there's no, if we're super busy with stuff, there's no requirement that on that specific day that because we're a signer of this agreement, that we send stuff to Flagstaff or whoever the other cooperators are. And I will tell you this, that the Brins fire, or La Bronca was one of the examples. of Brins was too, shoot the slide fire. But what they give us on our bad days far eclipses what we've provided them. So I think it's a good move for the district.
Okay. Any other discussion or questions for the chief on that? No. Okay, do I have a motion to approve?
Yes. I move to approve the Greater Flagstaff Cooperative IGA as presented.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, the IGA is approved.
Thank you, sir.
Next item on the agenda is the fire marshal's safety message.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As you know, we are hopefully approaching monsoon season shortly. We'll see. It seems as though the last 2 weeks' weather briefings that I've listened to from the National Weather Service, they've been very confident of upcoming precipitation, and within 2 days those models have changed. So, but they are predicting that monsoon will begin shortly. So I wanted to go over some monsoon safety tips. There's 3 big threats that we face from our monsoon storms. Number 1 is lightning. Lightning can reach out up to 10 miles away from the storm. So if you're within 10 miles of a storm and you're in a bad area, high elevation, it's time to seek shelter. The other one is the wind. It's not uncommon for just your typical thunderstorm outflow winds to gust to 40 miles an hour and occasionally much higher. But that presents problems with overhead branches, power lines, those sorts of things. So that's another threat to be aware of. And of course the rain, which can cause flash flooding. Everybody's heard the slogan, turn around, don't drown. It amazes me the number of people that pay no heed to that. But it's important to remember that as little as 6 inches of running water is enough to wash your car off the road. So it may look pretty benign, but in some cases, that's all it takes. That's all I have.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
The executive session that is normally presented in the front half of the meeting has been moved to the rear half, and we are at that point where that we possible vote to go into executive session for legal advice pursuant to ARS 38-431.03A3 and possible instruction to legal counsel pursuant to ARS 38-431.03A4 in regards to the proposed fire chief's contract. With that being the motion, do I have a second?
Second.
Second.
Any further discussion on that? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, we are now in executive session.
Mom, I'm in a board meeting. I'll call you back. Okay, bye.
We have a slight break.
I'm
Yeah.
sorry I couldn't